wonderful session by a charismatic and a charming speaker, Mr. Tini Phillips, on the topic How to Do Business Post COVID 19. To give you a small brief about Mr. Tini Phillips, he's the founder and CEO of Results Consulting Group. He's a recognized thought leader on helping entrepreneurs build and implement significant and lasting competitive edges in India and the GCC. He has gained his unique expertise and experience from his work with more than 50 different industries over the last 2 decades. Mr. Tini Phillips is also the director in Secura Investment Management Company. It's a SEBI-registered ethical real estate venture capitalist fund. He's a general partner in Mount Judy. He's a promoter in Ethical Venture Capitalist Fund. He's also published a book called The Contrarian Approach to Business, The Low-Risk Approach to Success, which is available on Amazon and Kindle. He also writes regularly in the column for entrepreneurs called The Contrarian Consultant in Kerala leading business magazine Dhanam, where he shares insight gained from his business advisory work. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Tini, and we're looking forward to hear from you. I hope you all enjoyed the session. Thank you so much. Handing over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be interacting with you through this webinar today. As you can see, the topic that we are going to talk about is how to do business post-COVID-19. Today, I intend to share with you some of my experiences working with my clients over the last 4 weeks to overcome this COVID-19 crisis. Today's agenda is as follows. We will first look at what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur in today's world. After that, we will try to understand COVID-19. We'll look at the disease. We will look at possible scenarios that can play out in any country or area. India specifically, as an example, what is happening and what kind of forecast we can estimate. We will then look at the economic impact related to India for COVID-19, and then I will briefly talk about the market impact of interest to you, and I will share a sample action plan that we created with one of my clients. Essential service business. About what kind of action plans you should have for your own.
1 second, brother. Mr. Mahan, could you please mute all the participants? I think someone has got Dr. Ismail C. Strong idea.
Can I start? Can I continue?
Yes, please. Yes, please, brother. Please.
Yeah. So finally, I will share a sample action plan that one of my clients is implementing. He's in the essential services sector, so he's been able to work during the lockdown. So from that, rather than giving you generic, suggestions about what you should do in your business, I thought a case study of what a particular business in Kerala is doing would help you out. Obviously, many of the things may not be, the initiatives, you may not be able to do exactly the same initiative because your business is different. But you could probably look at the kind of depth of the initiatives, the thought process of these initiatives. You could look at the speed in which it was implemented. And we've divided it into 3 phases. Phase 1 is the lockdown time, which we have implemented successfully, the initiatives for the lockdown. Phase 2, which is the short-term initiatives after the lockdown. And we've even got a phase 3, which is what we want to implement in the long term after the lockdown is opened. So I think that will be a very useful part for particularly people who are running their own businesses or even people who are working in different companies, because you could compare this sample action plan with the kind of plans that your company is already implementing. I know that many people have already created action plans and are implementing them because of this COVID-19 crisis. But unfortunately, I've also seen a large number of business people and managers who don't have an action plan. Actually, they're just waiting for the lockdown to open up, and some people are assuming that things will go back to normal or semi-normal, and some people are thinking that they'll plan once you open up, which I think is a very dangerous idea. And so, if you don't have a plan in place, or if your plan is not sufficiently aggressive, I hope that sample action plan will help you in trying to fine tune your plans for your business or company. And finally, there will be a question and answer session, in which I will try to answer as many questions as possible to the best of my ability. So let's start with the first part of what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur in today's world. So before 2016 demonetization, I usually told people that there were only two things that you needed to become a successful entrepreneur. One was that you needed to understand your market, basically, which means how your competitors are doing, what kind of behavior, or how are your consumers, and also the kind of products or services, how do they evolve in the market, what can you implement, those kind of things, understanding your market, which everyone obviously has to know. And along with that, you need to have the right approach to business. Now, what I mean by the right approach to business is, I believe, and I've been advocating this for many years, is that there are broadly two types of approaches to business. The first is what I call the popular approach to business, okay, which is promoted by management theory, business schools, many consultants and advisors. There's a particular method of doing business. For example, you grab the opportunity, grow very fast during boom times, expand like mad, take loans, leverage for growth, things, those kind of ideas. And there's been an alternate approach to business, which I normally call the contrarian approach to business, because it's followed by very few people. The popular approach is followed by probably 99% of the people in business, whereas the contrarian approach, or which I call the right approach to business, is followed by probably 1% or less, in my opinion. So if you're following the right approach to business and you understood your market pre-demonetization, that was enough for you to become a successful entrepreneur. After demonetization, the economy changed in India. So understanding the economy also became a prerequisite for a successful entrepreneur. Apart from having the right approach to business, understanding your market. In order to understand your market, you needed to understand how the economy was going. Just give you a very simple example, simplified. After demonetization, I took a view, and many of my clients took a view, that the economy was going down. Okay, and very clearly, we were very early on, we were able to identify that, and therefore we took decisions based on that. We grew. It's not that because the economy is going down, you have to shrink. We actually grew, but we grew in a healthy manner. Okay, we increased our productivity, we reduced our liabilities. We became very aggressive particularly in productivity and in pricing. And we understood that that's what the market figures of growth and the normal write-ups in newspapers and talking heads on TV saying that the slowdown was very minor and it was temporary in nature. Many people did the wrong things. They expanded too fast. They didn't look at productivity. They just added capacity. Many of them took up loans for expansion, and they suffered after a few years. So post 2016, understanding the economy became a prerequisite for success in business, because it tailored. It actually defined what kind of decisions you needed to take. By 2019, it became very clear to everyone, including the government, that the economy had slowed down dramatically. We are looking at official statistics of about 4.5% growth rate. So there became a call for the government, particularly the central government, to take action and stimulate the economy. So that started in late 2018, 2019. So the government also started to take some actions during 2019 in order to overcome this slowdown, as they called it. So in that also, now understanding government actions also became a necessity for entrepreneurs. Just seeing the figures and what the government announced was not enough. You needed to understand whether these government actions were timely and appropriate, or late and inappropriate, because depending on which angle you took, the path of the economy would either continue to go down, or it would flatten up and hopefully go up. So again, that became a prerequisite. And my view and my clients are appropriate. So we were of the opinion that the economy would continue to go down, and we accelerated the actions that we were already taking. previous to this, because we understood that the economy would continue to go down for a longer period. People who took the opposite view, obviously, they probably thought that the economy would flatten and would start taking off within a year, and they did not take the appropriate actions, in my opinion. Now, into 2020, what we have seen is that we have got this COVID-19 crisis coming, and again, you need, as an entrepreneur, unless you understand COVID-19 to some depth, you will not be able to understand how it will impact the economy and your market in future. Thereby, your decisions may not be, again, timely and appropriate. Because if you think that COVID-19 is a temporary phenomenon, go out after 3 months or 4 months, in which some people are saying that, I've seen those kind of reports, or people are saying that it's a 1 or 2 year activity and it's going to affect us for a long term. Your decisions that you take are going to be totally different. And what kind of impact will it have in your business if it is for the long term is also important. Many people have understood that this may take a couple of years to improve, but they've not really understood the kind of changes that may happen in the market, in the economy, and the way they need to adjust their business in order to be successful. So right now, in my opinion, all these factors are a prerequisite for a person to become a successful entrepreneur in today's post-COVID-19 world. So let's look at understanding COVID-19 very briefly. I'm sure all of you have been, flooded with information about COVID-19, so I'll keep it very brief. But you need to have a fundamental understanding. So there are a few slides which I'd like to share. So let's first understand the disease very briefly. So although COVID-19 is actually a disease with very low mortality compared to many other diseases like Ebola or SARS or MERS, it is causing a lot of chaos. Now, what is the reason for that? Now, the reason is that it is highly infectious. Okay, according to experts, it can infect between 1.6 to 3 people. I mean, if I'm a carrier, I get infected. The chances are that I can infect up to 3 people before my infection goes down. And that is because it is transmitted through saliva, mucus, cough droplets, and there is also suspicion through air. Okay. And one of the peculiar characteristics of this disease is that it has a large number of asymptomatic cases. Large number, between 40 to 60% of the people have very, very mild symptoms. So they probably wouldn't even know that they have COVID-19, and they could transmit it because, if you don't know that you have COVID-19 and you're not within the suspect bracket of people, like people who have traveled from abroad and so on, you could, if there was no lockdown, you could actually tend to lead a normal life, assuming that you're not infected. Okay, and then you could spread the disease. So that is one of the biggest issues. It is highly infectious because of these parameters. Now, although it is having a low mortality, what does this mean? It means that there's an exponential growth in cases which can overload the healthcare system of a country and increase the death rate disproportionately. We've seen that happening in Italy, for example, Spain, where the death rate is very high because of overload of cases. Okay, so in this case, what happens is, COVID-19 critical cases require ventilators, ICUs, and beds need to be isolated. They need to be isolated. So what happens is, if your cases go up exponentially, the number of the healthcare capacity for COVID-19 patients is exceeded, and therefore you have cases like in Italy where 4 people and 1 ventilator, 4 people who need ventilators, and you have only 1 ventilator available, and the doctors have to take a triad: who will live, who will die. So because of the overwhelming of the capacity, a lot of COVID patients die. Second is the non-COVID patients, your heart attacks, your dialysis, your cancer patients. Because the healthcare capacity gets flooded with COVID-19, and healthcare workers also get infected and they have to move out of the front line, the capacity to treat the normal illnesses apart from COVID-19 also goes down, whereby a lot of patients who actually don't have COVID-19 will die because they're not getting proper treatment in this kind of crisis. So that is why COVID-19 is such a problematic disease, not because of the inherent mortality, but because of the collapse in the healthcare system that occurs because of the exponential rate in the cases. So let's look at a couple of scenarios which are possible in COVID-19 for a state or for a country or for a region. The first is what I call the no action scenario, or the breakdown scenario, where the government breaks down or no action is taken. Now, what happens in this case is that if you see from this graph, the red line is the number of new cases daily. The blue line is the daily deaths. Okay, and if you look at the dotted line at the bottom, it is the healthcare capacity of that country or state or district or region or whatever it is. So as long as the red line is below the healthcare capacity, death rate, everything is controlled. But as you can see, if no action is taken, that is, infection is allowed to, run rampant, and we're talking of up to 3 cases. Each person can infect up to 3 cases, 3 other people. Then obviously, one person will become three, three will become nine, nine will become 27, and the daily new cases start going up exponentially. And very quickly, the healthcare capacity is overtaken, and you start seeing a huge spike in the deaths. Now, in this particular case, which is a rare case, because it means that the government of that area is not taking any action, or the government has broken down in terms of people, don't obey what the government is telling them. What happens there is that we have a huge number of cases, and we have a huge number of daily deaths, way beyond what we are seeing in US or Italy. I'm talking of much larger numbers. And it starts to peter off when sufficient percentage of the population become immune to the virus through infection and recovery. Now, what do you mean by this? Now, for example, if I am one of the early, I'm in the early stages of infection and I get infected, I interact with 100 people, and virtually all the 100 people have not had COVID-19 before in the initial stage. So what happens is I could probably transmit my disease to 3 people. But over a period of time, let's say after 6 months, where half the population has got COVID-19, and either some of them have died and the others have recovered, and then I get that's the point of time that I get my infection. Then when I go to and interact with 100 people, 50 of them are hopefully immune to COVID-19 because they've already got it and recovered. Okay? So in that case, my transmission rate will drop to 1.5 or even below. So the moment my transmission rate drops below 1, the number of daily new cases starts to flatten and then starts to go down. So that's the kind of curve that we are seeing on the chart, the red curve. Okay? And that happens when sufficient percentage of the population becomes immune. And similarly, the death rate also starts dropping once the daily cases drop and the healthcare capacity, it comes to within the healthcare capacity of the country. This is a rare scenario, but it can happen in areas not because of lack of government action probably, but because if things deteriorate to such a level in certain areas, people may actually completely flout the government norms, deciding that there was no point in following the norm because the death rate is so high, infection rate is so high, might as well face it. The best case scenario, which is the scenario that I'm talking about, which is being shown on the screen right now, is actually being followed in Korea, South Korea. South Korea is the only major country which actually is within the best case scenario till date. So, what is the best case scenario? The government, identifies that COVID-19 is a very serious issue early on, which is what Korea did. It, scales up. It starts producing kits. It starts producing PPEs even before the first case comes. It prepares a protocol for managing this scenario. Okay, and South Korea did that. In fact, they had the experience of MERS, I think, in 2003 from that Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, which affected them badly. They had created a protocol to handle that from the experience of MERS, and they very early on identified that the virus was happening in China because they have a lot of contact with China, and they implemented massive early testing and stringent isolation norms, quarantine and isolation, contact testing, and they also increased their health capacity to take care of COVID-19 patients. As you can see from the graph, the healthcare capacity was pushed up in the early stages of the disease. And because of their massive testing and quarantine policy, they were able to bring down the curve and keep it within manageable proportions even till date. In fact, the curve has slightly dropped recently. And the funny part, the greatest part, is that they have done this without implementing a total lockdown. They've not had the necessity to implement a total lockdown. And they believe that they can manage this entire problem without resorting to a massive total lockdown. Okay. So this is a very best case scenario because the economy is the least affected, and death rate is also very low. Now this scenario, sufficient percentage of the population becomes immune through vaccination. So we're all waiting for a vaccination to be developed. Once a viable vaccination is developed, which could then take anywhere from, the average is 18 months. Probably people may accelerate, but let's say 1.5 years. After that, at that point of time, for example, South Korea expects to vaccinate uh, all its people, and thereby, the cases will peter down, and finally this would not become a problem. So this is the best case scenario, and the only major country in terms of population, 51 million, which is actually is following this scenario till date, is South Korea. So I would urge you all to actually study South Korea in detail, see what happens, to get an idea of, in future what could be applied to India. The next scenario is what I call the common scenario, the most common thing. This is a scenario which I believe will be, which will have the largest number of entities following, which is the common scenario. In that, what happens is that, initially there is a poor response, like low testing, poor social distancing, no scaling up of testing capacity initially, like the South Koreans did. They scaled up. Most countries have not been able to do that initially. And so what happens is you can see from the red line that the number of daily cases goes up. And in one scenario like Italy, it goes up and crosses the threshold, and you have a lot of deaths and chaos, for example, in northern Italy. And Italy implements a late lockdown. Okay, once you've crossed the threshold and you have a lot of chaos. So Italy also implemented a lockdown after all the chaos happened, total lockdown, and it is there till 3rd of May. And the Italian figures have started to drop, and they will lift the lockdown once it comes within control. In this time, they also increase the healthcare capacity of the country, and hopefully, after some time, it will be like South Korea, where with cluster containment, red, green zones, and extensive testing, and quarantining, and contact tracing, you can keep the transmission rates within control until a time when a vaccination occurs, and then vaccinate the population, and then the disease peters out. In India, for example, India as a case study has had actually a comparatively early lockdown. So you can see from the chart on the left side, I've said India actually implemented a lockdown early on compared to Italy, and before the healthcare system of the country was overwhelmed. But even if the lockdown is not done properly, what will happen is that we will see the cases rising and the same scenario playing out. Because if testing is not scaled up at the appropriate time, if social distancing norms are not kept properly, we will see the same scenario, even though early lockdown has been done. So let's look at India, because I think most of us are quite interested in what is happening in India. And 2 days ago, I had a webinar in Kerala, so I had a section for Kerala also, because most of the business people have a large exposure to Kerala. But in this time, I'll be just talking to you about India specifically. And let's try and understand what the scenario is in India today. So this is data till 23rd of April. We have had 21,393 cases till that day. It's gone up in the last 2 days. 681 deaths. Our peak daily new cases till April 23rd, the peak number that hit was 1,553. And we had 50 deaths. The maximum was 50 deaths. And as you can see from the red line, the chart, we started the lockdown at this stage when we were having probably 50 cases, 80 cases a day. And despite the lockdown, our cases have shot up to 1,400, 1,500 cases per day right now. And over the recent few days, it seems to be in that range. So hopefully there's some sort of flattening. This is the current situation in India. And now let's look at the testing, because testing is a way of getting out of total lockdown successfully. South Korea shows that if you have enough testing done and your people are disciplined enough to self-quarantine, to go under quarantine and follow the minimum social distancing norms, you can actually control this virus without having a total lockdown. So I'm just putting up the figures now. Italy after everything collapsed and went into total lockdown, they scaled up their testing massively, and in fact they're doing more tests per 1,000 than the Koreans. So if you look at it today, Italy is performing about one test per 1,000 people of their population every day, which is a very, very huge number. South Korea is doing about zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2, less than 0.2, and you can see India at the bottom is very, very negligible as per the population that we have. Let's look at the total tests done till date. Till April 22nd, Italy had done 25.59 tests per 1,000 of their population. Their population is about 70 million. South Korea had done about 11.22, and India was at 0.33. So the problem is that unless, as a country, if we look at India, unless they hit close to the South Korean figures or even on that range, it would not be possible for India to control its COVID-19 using the South Korean method of no lockdown. I'm talking about after the lockdown is opened up. So unless this problem is solved, or we're going to have a very big problem looking at the entire country as a whole. So why were the figures shooting up even after 2 weeks after lockdown? It's most probably one of the biggest reasons was the fact that although the lockdown was done early, the problem of migrant labor was not planned out correctly. So I see a few defects in the early lockdown. First, there was no consultation with the chief ministers for enforcing the lockdown. And to lift the lockdown, the central government consulted with the state chief ministers. But that was not doing it at the beginning was a very big mistake, because a lot of ground reality issues were not taken care of. For example, migrant labor. So what we saw is before the lockdown, we had a lot of migrant labor moving back to rural areas, because as it is, the disease problems that already started, people have started getting scared. And after the lockdown, we saw a lot of migrant labor walk, and in some cases like Delhi, they were transported by buses to Uttar Pradesh. And so that the whole question of management has broken. This disease will spread to rural India. And for the many migrant laborers who actually stuck on to the cities, we can see that they are living in crowded rooms where social distancing is not possible. I'm not saying that there are easy solutions to all this, but what happened is, because of the lack of consultation and the lack of planning, we didn't see any planning before the lockdown to take care of this big issue. And whatever has happened has been reactive. Okay, so it's been too late, in my opinion. So this has actually negated a large, part of the positive impact of a total lockdown. Another very worrying thing, I don't know whether some of you have seen this. We have been focused on this in Kerala, because Kerala was, for you all know that India 14-day quarantine was what most states have prescribed for suspect cases, like people coming in from abroad. Kerala was the only state which actually propagated a 28-day lockdown, as far as I am aware. And what we are seeing now in the last week or so is people are testing positive even after 14 days. So this is the data that came in a clipping a couple of days ago. So somebody arrived on March 22nd. His case was confirmed on April 8th. So that's 17 days, you can see from there. And we have all the way till somebody coming on March 17th from abroad and being tested positive on April 12th. These are people who are under 28-day quarantine. In fact, now we feel that people are testing even after 28 days. Okay, so this is a big issue, because a lot of cases from abroad, people who came from abroad in many states across the country, have had, after 14-day quarantine, they were no longer in quarantine. Okay, but luckily we had the lockdown coming in. But this is an issue. So in future, if somebody gets infected after the lockdown, is 14-day enough? Or if he's a suspect case, is 14-day enough? Is a very big question. So what is the India situation? I put a question mark because it is not clear. We have a very low scale of testing due to shortage of kits. In fact, recently we had a controversy about kits not working properly, and they've been withdrawn for a couple of days. So that's a very big issue. Unless we test, we won't know what is actually happening. We've had a 21-day lockdown, which has been extended to 3rd May. If you look at it, our daily new cases have increased very rapidly until the last few days, where they're sort of plateauing at about 1,500, 1,400. Our mortality rate is slightly on the higher side, 3.18%. And what we are seeing, very worrying factor, is that infection is peaking at different times in different states. For example, the first state which was infected was Kerala, and Kerala has peaked and has come down. And after that, we've seen Maharashtra now starting. We don't know whether it's peaked, but it's going up. After that, followed by now Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, and so on. And there are a lot of other states which have started climbing now. The numbers have started climbing as testing has increased. So this is a very worrying factor, because if everyone peaks at the same time and goes down, control is easier. But obviously that's not going to happen in India. So we're going to see this infection peaking at different times in different states. And if reinfection happens, and after some time, which everyone is theorizing about, that after it comes down, it can also go up again. We will probably see again a different peaking. So it's very, very difficult to manage a situation where everyone's not in the same boat. So I personally believe that community transmission has occurred in India, primarily because of the migrant labor chaos that occurred. Although I think the government of India is still, and states are still saying that we are not into stage 3, we're somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3. It is very clear, in my opinion, that community transmission has occurred and we have to plan for it. Now, as I said, we will see a wide range of outcome between states. We cannot treat India as one entity for COVID-19. We have to look at it, evaluate each state separately. In fact, each area separately, ideally state, because that is the next level of governance. So if your business is in a particular state only, you need to look at that state and what the government is doing and how the public health infrastructure is, and you will have to take a call on how that state, COVID-19 will play out in that state. And in my opinion, the outcomes will be very, very different for different states. So we cannot have a one solution fit all or one forecast for India per se, because as a business person, you really need to know, or a person working in business, you need to know, my market, how will it be impacted? And if your market is within a state, then you need to look at that state. If it is within 3-4 states, you need to look at those 3-4 states. Of course, if it is all India, then you need to decide, how much of your market will be affected, because certain states are in very bad shape, and certain states are in much better shape. So let's look at the forecast. I believe that testing will be scaled up to higher levels across the countries as test kits become available. Okay, state governments are most of the. You can see a big difference right now. Some state governments have really taken the initiative. Others are still waiting or are behind. But I believe that, and because of that, I think testing ratios will vary significantly between states in the initial period. In the next few months, the states which aggressively go ahead with testing will go up, and many states, I think politics is being played today. Many states are actually suppressing their numbers in order to not look bad, I think, and you can see that playing out in the media. And so what is happening is that, if some states' figures go up, then other states are willing to increase their figures because they don't look bad. So ultimately, hopefully, after a period, maybe the testing ratios will remain within the same range. But I don't think that's going to happen because of the population difference. So we will see significant testing ratios between states, and that's why we need to look at issues state-wise. I believe daily cases will continue to go up as testing improves, and I think the peak is not 1,500, which we hit recently. I think the peak will go even higher, much, much higher, as the data from other states starts coming in. So cluster containment will be implemented, which is your red, orange, green zone after the lockdown is lifted. And I believe that the criteria for red, orange, and green will be left to the states by the center, because, as I said, you cannot have a one policy, fit all, one policy for everyone, because you will have such a different stages in different states. In some states, you may be seeing 5 or 10 cases per day. In another state, you may be seeing 1,000 cases per day. So in that state, you can't lock down the entire state, even if it's 1,000 cases in future. You need to have green zones. So the green zone, the definition of green zone, the definition may change, and maybe allow, the states may be allowed to define the criteria, in my opinion. I firmly believe that healthcare capacity in many areas will be overwhelmed, like Italy. It's already starting to happen in Mumbai. As you can see, the picture shows the NSI stadium. which has been converted into isolation ward. So I think due to huge increase in cases, area-wise, city-wise, area-wise, district-wise, we can see healthcare capacity getting overwhelmed. And people may not be willing to shift patients from one area to the other, so patients may be stuck in that area. I also think that total lockdown will probably not be implemented again, despite even though the figures are high, because this is not economically viable. And if you keep on doing a total lockdown, ultimately people will rebel. And if livelihoods are suffering, people don't have money, so people will rebel, and the lockdown will be broken. If a few people break the lockdown, the police can control. But if it goes beyond a level, there's no control. So I think cluster containment will be the future. And so red zone, so people will accept, okay, red zone has to have that, but we have a green zone. So we have the possibility of getting into a green zone once our cases go down. So total lockdown will probably not be implemented. I hope it's not implemented also, because if it is, I'm not sure what the economic outcome will be. A disaster. So I believe India will suffer from waves of infection occurring in different areas over the next 1 to 2 years, or till an effective vaccine is deployed. Now, the vaccine problem is, first you have to identify a vaccine, get the trials done, and it has to be economically viable also and easy to administer. I'll just give you an example. Recently, the deputy director of the ICMR was asked a question about testing, and in his answer, he actually said that testing is expensive. Like 4,500 rupees or whatever it is. And he said that, as a country, we cannot afford to test everyone. So like, if that's the kind of mindset that the government has, that is, we cannot afford to do testing beyond the limit because we're a poor country, we're a developing country. Then if the vaccine is also, if the vaccine becomes expensive or comes out very expensive, the mindset could be that we can't afford this vaccine in India. Okay, or only rich people can take this vaccine, or we cannot subsidize this vaccine. So if that is the case, then that's why I'm saying till an effective vaccine is deployed. So if an effective vaccine means not only medically effective but probably economically viable, based on what the government's policies at that point, whether they're willing to subsidize it or not. So that's when probably this problem will end. So we're looking at least a couple of years. I tell my clients 1.5 years minimum. We have to assume that this is going to continue. These problems are going to continue, and of course, if we get out of it earlier, great. I also believe that some states, my home state of Kerala as an example, will have a much better outcome, more green zones and less red zones compared to other states, because of the difference in the public health infrastructure and the kind of actions the government has taken early on. But even in Kerala, I still believe the numbers that we are talking about for green zone is very negligible. In fact, even today, it's like green zone is 0 cases. So I don't think that's going to happen. So in Kerala, once the central government also loosens the criteria, Kerala will also have to loosen the criteria and say that a green zone is like you can have maybe 5 or 6 cases in the district. That's a green zone per day. Now, that's the kind of figures or 3 to 4 cases per day is okay for a district. Today, the theory is that 0 is okay for a district. It's not possible. We have interstate movement of goods. Truck drivers will come. We are going to see a huge influx of NRI population coming in from the Gulf. So it's not possible that we will have 0 cases over the next 1 year or 2 years. So anyhow, as I mentioned earlier, outcomes will be very different for different states and different regions. For example, maybe some cities may be in very big problem, like we've seen Chennai, Mumbai, Indore, Delhi. Whereas maybe some rural areas may be better off, more developed rural areas. So it's a confusing thing. You need to look at it from your market perspective, and you need to take a call on what you think will be happening. So let's look at the economic impact now of this COVID-19. So before that, we need to understand the severity of the impact depends on many factors on the economy. One is, how was the pre-COVID economy? How was the economy before COVID-19 actually hit us? Then what is the impact of the local total lockdown? Okay. And what will be the impact of cluster containment? I said, I believe that over the next 1 year or 1 to 2 years, probably, we will be having this red zone, orange, green zone concept. Okay. So what is the impact of that kind of scenario on the economy. And last but not least, what kind of mitigating impact will the government of India actions have? Because the government of India is the only entity capable of actually mitigating the economic impact of COVID-19, because it can print notes or it can run a fiscal deficit if it wants, much higher fiscal deficit than it's running. No state government can do it right now. They don't have the ability to print notes. They have to borrow. So the government of India actions also will have a significant impact on how bad this, the impact on the economy. So we need to look at all these points briefly. So pre-COVID-19 economy, in my opinion, was very weak. Everyone believes it was very weak. We've had a slowdown, but I've been advocating for more than a year that we were already in recession. Okay? It's not that we were in 4% or 4.5% growth rate. We were in minus, and I'll just briefly touch upon why I believe that we were already in a recession. So the Indian economy is actually divided into the organized sector and the unorganized sector. Okay, and a few years ago, the unorganized sector was more than 50% of the economy. Right now, it is estimated that the organized sector is 55% of GDP and the unorganized sector is 45% of GDP. But there's a very big difference in employment. The unorganized sector has the majority of employment. It is estimated that up to 90% of the working population of India are in the unorganized sector, and only 10% of the working population are in the organized sector. Okay, and unorganized sector includes agriculture. So the impact on people is, if things go badly for the unorganized sector, it impacts a large number of people. And the organized sector, it impacts few people. So that's the difference. Although the organized sector is 55% of the GDP. Also, the organized sector is dependent on its demand from the unorganized sector people. 90% of the working population are in the unorganized sector. They are the people who are consuming. So 90% of the wage earners or business people are in the unorganized sector. They are the ones who create demand. So the organized sector is actually catering to a lot of people, the demand of people working in the unorganized sector in terms of consumer goods and services. So any impact on the unorganized sector will definitely have a impact on the demand for the organized sector. So it's all interlinked. So another factor that you all need to understand is that these economic statistics that the government releases about growth rate and all that on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis, is based on sampling or surveys. So for the organized sector, since a lot of data is available, tax, people are in the tax bracket, people are paying GST, listed companies are there, they file returns with the company, Ministry of Company Affairs, LLP, registration, so on. You have to file a lot of financial data. So the government is able to reasonably get a good picture about the organized sector every quarter and every year. So the data for that is reasonably accurate. The unorganized sector, it's very difficult to get data. Most of them are not in the organized sector, banking channels, or they're not paying any taxes as such. So it's very difficult to get accurate data on the unorganized sector. So what the government has been doing for many years, decades, is that sampling, a detailed survey of the unorganized sector is done once every 5 years. And that data is used as a base for the collating data or estimating what the organized sector figures are. So that the last time this survey was done was in 2016, before demonetization. Okay? And the next survey is supposed to occur this coming year, 2020-21. So now, in the interim period between two survey years, like 2016 till date, and even previously, every 5 years, there's a gap of 5 years. In those years, the unorganized sector growth rate, because you need to estimate the growth, you get a base. Now you need to estimate a growth rate so you can project every year what the unorganized sector is going. I mean, as it's growing, what is the GDP percentage, or what are the numbers? That growth rate is not there because there's no survey done, right? In these 5 years, intervening 5 years. So what the government has been doing, or the statistics department of the government has been doing, is they've made an assumption. They'll take a proxy for that growth rate. So the figure they take as a proxy is the organized sector growth rate, which they're able to get. They're able to get the organized sector growth rate because data is available every quarter. So let's say the organized sector is growing at 7% in the quarter as per their survey. They assume that the unorganized sector is also growing at 7%, and the assumption is reasonably valid because barring any special things which happen to the economy, anything which happens to the economy affects both sectors more or less equally. Unfortunately, we have had demonetization happening to us in 2016 November, which has had a much higher negative impact on the unorganized sector. So that assumption doesn't hold good after 2016 November. That is, you can't take the organized sector growth rate and plug it into the unorganized sector figures and assume that the unorganized sector is growing at the same rate. But that is exactly what the government has been doing for the last 5 years, because that is the norm which has been followed till date. So whatever figures that we have been seeing about the growth rate of the Indian economy is actually the growth rate of the organized sector of the Indian economy, which has been projected to the unorganized sector. And the same figure comes out. 55% is growing at 7%, and the 45% of the GDP, you put 7% also as a proxy. Obviously, your average growth rate or your total growth rate for GDP of the country remains 7%. So that's the figure we've been seeing. Okay, the unorganized sector real picture has not been reflected in the growth rate. Second thing is the current growth rate of the organized sector has also been inflated. Is showing at a higher than normal figure because they've changed the series, the starting date of when they start looking at this data. I'm not getting that, we don't have time. But suffice to say, the chief economic advisor of the first term Modi government, Arvind Subramanian, has written a paper in which he says that the growth rate shown for the Indian economy for the last 4-5 years is in excess by 2 to 2.5%. That is, it's actually 2 to 2.5% lower than what is shown if you want to compare it with previous year's figures, okay, which is obviously what we want to do. So if you look at that, what he has said, and use that as, and not him, many people have said that, and use that as a base. The last quarter that we had before COVID, the economy was supposed to be growing, if I remember correctly, about 4 to 4.5% on a quarterly basis, year on year. And that we must understand, that is the organized sector growth rate. So if you add his correction factor of, let's say, you reduce it by 2.5%, which is in excess, then the organized sector growth rate was actually 2% pre-COVID, which is what I'm showing in the slide. Now, what is the unorganized sector growth rate? So obviously, we don't have the figures. So the best proxy that you can use for the unorganized sector is actually the employment, because 90% of the people are working in the unorganized sector. So if employment is going up, you can say that the unorganized sector is growing, and you can estimate reasonably well that the growth rate is in line with the actual growth rate of employment. Or if unemployment is going up or employment is shrinking, then you can also say that the unorganized sector is probably shrinking. Now, there are a few economists in India who are very focused on the unorganized sector, Arun Kumar, J.T. Ghosh. So they have estimated that in the last couple of years, the unorganized sector has been shrinking between 5 to 10% every year. Yes, 5 to 10% every year. So I've taken the conservative figure of minus 5% based on what they are saying, and they've done based on estimating unemployment, MNREGA, people applying for MNREGA, people who don't have money, would normally don't have jobs, especially in the rural sector, would be going for those kind of government schemes. So based on those statistics, they have estimated conservatively that the unorganized sector has been shrinking at 5%. So if you put those two figures together and you take an average, it means that the total economy is been shrinking before COVID-19, which means we were already in recession. And that's why I say that we were in recession before COVID-19. So we are very weak. The economy is actually very weak much weaker than many people think before COVID-19. Now, what has happened because of that? Now, in Kerala, we have had a weakening of the economy since 2015, when the Gulf crisis came. 2016, we had demonetization. We've had multiple shocks. 2017, GST. 2018, we had catastrophic floods, Nipah virus. 2019, we again had floods. And now, obviously, 2020, we have COVID-19. India as such has not had the the Nipah or the floods or the Gulf crisis to some extent, but India overall has been hit by demonetization. Before that has been hit by the banking crisis. After demonetization, GST hit the economy, and after that we have had the NBFC crisis. Okay, so also the entire Indian economy has also been hit by crises every year, more or less. So what happens when you have a crisis or you have a problem which hits the economy like this? Obviously, the market goes down, margins shrink, competition intensifies, and a lot of businesses start running into loss. Okay, so you're a businessman, you're running, let's say you're having a 10 crore turnover a year, and you run into a 1 crore loss because of, let's say, demonetization or GST or whatever. What do you normally do in order to live? They don't have savings. Lockdown has killed their livelihood. They've not got enough money from the government. They may have got some food. Okay, so high unemployment rate is now spiked up to 24% in this lockdown period as per CMI. So that that may be a temporary thing, but it's going to be really high over the next year, and that will reduce demand, and it will be in the unorganized sector which will be hit the worst, and of course the organized sector, people are weak. Again, it's also a simultaneous supply and demand shock. We previously had a demand shock created by demonetization and which was spiraling out of control. But now we've also had a huge supply shock. Everything is cutting salaries. We've got the central government now stopping DA increases. Kerala government, in my opinion, has already initiated cuts in salary for the next 6 months, 1 year. So even the government sector, in many areas, the salaries will go down. So forget the private sector. We're looking at the government sector also, people salaries being delayed or being reduced. So it's a huge shock. It's like that's why I was trying to say that repeating this total lockdown may not be a feasible option down the line. I'm not saying that lockdown shouldn't have been done. Probably it was a good decision. I think it was the right decision given India's situation and given at that particular point of time what had been done till date. But it, because of this migrant labor problem and issue, it has not had the desired impact. So we're going to have the economic impact, and we're going to still have the medical impact hitting us, despite having an early lockdown. So, what is the future? Assuming the lockdown is opened on May 3rd, and we go into this red, orange, green zone concept, cluster containment, which I think is the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is again going in for another lockdown. What will be the impact on the economy? So, I believe the economy will not be able to run at full throttle because of these partial lockdowns, cluster containment, and social distancing. Very simple. If you look at a shop, okay, which with social distancing norm, now you can only have so many people coming to the shop, so your offline sales are going to go down dramatically. And a lot of industries like travel, tourism are going to be in very bad shape, event management, for the next 1 year, assuming that we have this kind of strategy in place. Also, shortages of supply will occur. Even today, supply is happening, and supply is not just raw material supply or material supply. For example, I have a basic factory which produces a basic raw material. Labor supply is a problem. Today, even FMCG, which is essential services, we are seeing that hardly 30 to 40% of capacity is being utilized right now, despite demand. And in many cases, it's because of labor shortage. We don't have enough labor. People have left; they are not able to come in, or they are under containment. So shortage of supply is going to happen especially for value for money goods, and even things which people require in a recessionary economy. Another great danger is the significant chance of social unrest, which we're already seeing in pockets here and there. People beating up medical workers, police, when they get frustrated or they've got the wrong information, or they're thinking that what these people are doing is not good. So if this continues, and I believe this cluster containment and all will continue for a year or two, we most probably will see breakouts of social unrest in many areas when people get totally frustrated because once your livelihood is there and you're going to die of starvation or of lack of money, then you will break the rules and you will not follow the rules in that cluster. And so we will see Section 144 curfew. We may even see the army being brought out in certain areas to control the people, because people get frustrated and rebel. Okay, Okay, so that will also cause a lot of economic stoppages, because that area, nothing can work then. It's going to be under curfew, under lockdown, under patrolling. So we can see the economy will be lucky if the total Indian economy works at about 50 to 60%. I don't think it's going to happen. Korea right now is, in my opinion, is operating at about 70-75% of its capacity, which is very, very good. I don't think India as a whole will be able to operate at more than 40 to 50% of its capacity, given what we are seeing today. So even the future, the impact on the economy is going to be very, very severe. The last thing which we need to look at is the Government of India actions. As I said, the only entity capable of mitigating the economic impact is the Government of India. Unfortunately, I believe that till date, the actions have been inadequate and late from the central government. Okay. If you look at, there are three sectors which need to be taken care of: the poor, the marginalized and the poor, the MSME, and the corporates. If you look at it. So the only package which has been announced till date has been for the poor. The MSME is still supposed to be tomorrow or day after, and corporates is after that. A lot of planning seems to be going on. I don't see why so much of planning was required, but anyhow, that's a different story. So if you look at the package of 1.7 lakh crore which was announced, I believe if you analyze it properly, and many experts have done it, the actual extra amount being proposed to be spent by the government was significantly less than 1 lakh crore. Okay, and many of the amounts were repackaging of existing schemes and front loading of existing schemes, which was not an extra amount, which can be, you can't attribute it as an extra spending by the government. So that, in my opinion, that package was actually very, very low compared to what was required. Okay. Now, if based on that fact and based on the kind of actions that were taken by the government before COVID to stimulate the economy, in 2019, last budget, and even the previous budget and all that, this government has a fixation on the fiscal deficit. They don't want to use the fiscal deficit beyond the problem because they think that is wrong economics. So, be that as it may, it's debatable. Before the COVID-19, you could have that debate whether fiscal stimulus being kept within 3.8% or 3% is better than, or pushing it to 4 to 4.5%. There's a debate. But post-COVID, I don't think that debate is valid anymore, because all governments are pushing for heavy stimulus. So fiscal deficit is no longer a criteria at this point. Okay, and for the next 1 year, I don't think it's going to be a criteria. That is, you're fiscally very loose. Your government is wasting too much money, and so you're not a good country. That kind of analysis is gone. In fact, so actually, this government could increase the fiscal deficit significantly without very much negative implications on the international front, because everyone is doing it. But given that they're doing what they've done, seems to be that they're trying to keep the total, because they have three people to satisfy: corporates, MSMEs, and poor. So my belief is that the government has got a total figure that they actually think they can spend extra. In my opinion, it's something like probably 4-5 lakh crore actual, so less than that, 3 to 4 lakh crore actual figure they are willing to spend extra. Okay, and they need to apportion it between these three sectors. And obviously, being a poor country, the government needs to show that more money is given to the poor compared to the MSME and compared to the corporates. And that is why I think this figure has been boosted to 1.7 lakh crore. So the actual spend is less than 1 crore, but it's packaged so that it looks like 1.7. So that, for example, in the corporates, we can spend 1 lakh crore or 1.5 lakh crore and say that, it is below what is being spent for the poor. And my belief is we'll see over the next week or two, when the packages actually come out, the actual amount spent for corporates will be higher than the actual amount spent for the poor people. Because the corporates are people who can lobby with the government. There's nobody to lobby for the poor people. And that's what we've been seeing over the last year, where 1.4 lakh crore corporate tax cuts were given in 2019. Whereas in the last budget, allocations for social expenditure like MNREGA and all that were actually cut. Okay, the government saying that we don't have the money. Okay. So this government seems to be, following that kind of economic theory, where the supply side has to be taken care of, Whereas given a country, I believe that's wrong, a country like India, it's the demand side which needs to be taken care of, which will automatically increase the supply. Okay, so I don't think the government of India actions are sufficient to mitigate the crisis. In the RBI actions were done, which were reasonably okay, but even those actions are not sufficient. So delay in announcing schemes, as I said, we still haven't got the MSME corporate schemes coming out. And so far, central government has committed less than 1%. Please understand, 200 lakh crore is the GDP of the country. So, 1% is 2 lakh crore. So we have not even done 1 lakh crore for the poor people, actual extra spend. So we have committed less than 1% of the GDP right now, whereas other countries, you can see from the chart, have 5%, 10%. Okay, we don't need to do 10% or 20%, but we could actually do 3-4% of the GDP easily in this kind of scenario, which is not being done. I hope I'm proved wrong by subsequent announcements, but my belief is that it's not going to happen. So what is the impact on the GDP growth rate? So this chart sums it up. I've got the growth rate on the y-axis, so 0, positive and negative. And I've got time on the x-axis. So as you can see, I believe that after demonetization, the economy really started crashing. It was slowing down a little bit before demonetization because of the bank NPA crisis. It's crashed, and then GST, and then it went down. And I believe before the lockdown, we were actually, as I had mentioned earlier, in recession. We were in minus growth. Okay. Now, the lockdown has hit us with all the negatives I've said, and including the fact that the government of India's mitigation is not sufficient, in my opinion. We are going to see a very sharp decline in growth rate immediately, which is this part that you can see here. You can see my mouse. And once the lockdown is lifted, because of the partial lockdown effects, and I believe the lack of sufficient government support, we're going to see a continuing drop of the economy until hopefully sometime when a vaccine comes into play and we are able to get back to reasonable levels of working, and slowly the economy will start picking. As you can see, I have not actually shown the economy crossing zero in this entire chart, because I think real GDP growth to become positive will take some time, at least a year and a half, or 2 years. Because then you're comparing with your previous figure, like the crash which happens, economic contracts now. After 1 year, if it is slightly above this situation, you'll show a positive growth. Okay. So it's the recession that we are going to face is going to be very deep, and it's going to be quite long. Okay. And you can definitely look at 1-2 years minimum, and that is the kind of planning that you should have. What is the market impact? So there are a lot of market impacts, but since we are running out of time, I'll be very briefly give you the main market impact that I think will happen. Is that I believe strong businesses will dominate over the next 2 years, and strong doesn't mean big, by the way. Okay, what I mean by strong is strong. It can be small or big businesses, and in weak there'll also be a lot of large businesses which are weak. So strong doesn't mean large. Strong, I'll give you the definition of strong in the next slide. So strong businesses will dominate. So if you can see from this slide, I hope you can see my mouse, the market size will crash because of the lockdown, partial cluster containment and all that. Hopefully after some time it will stabilize, and then it will slowly start increasing once the vaccine comes into play. But the more interesting part in this whole graph is the share. So if you look at, we have a particular share of strong businesses, average and weak. This strong business share is going to shoot up, although the market is declining, because a lot of weak businesses are going to close down. When I mean by weak, people who have high debt, I mentioned earlier, they don't have any relief. They will not be able to survive the recession that is coming. And a lot of average businesses will also move into weak and close down. So this is the scenario for strong businesses. And let me get into the definition of strong businesses for you. So I just compared a strong business with a weak business on some parameters. So obviously a strong business is somebody who has had zero or very minor loans. A weak business is somebody who is having high debt. In a strong business, he would be cash surplus before COVID-19. In most weak businesses, they are actually running at cash negative even before COVID-19. Strong businesses are obviously profitable before COVID-19, whereas weak businesses are 100% at a loss because you're running a cash negative. So obviously you're running at a book loss. And strong businesses have very high employee productivity, and weak businesses have poor employee productivity. I'll just give you an example of what I mean by employee productivity. Let's assume you have a distribution wing. You're selling. Your salesman is selling. You have a van salesman or an order taking salesman, bike salesman. Now, as the economy went down over the last few years, if you're a strong businessman, you would have figured out that value for money is going up. People need more value for the money they are paying. So effectively, prices have to go down. Okay, for the products that you're selling. If your prices are lower compared to competitors, you can get more sales. So if you have a good salesman and you ask him, like, in this market, how can I double the sales? He will definitely tell you, if he's a good salesman, he'll tell you that you need to have the appropriate products and pricing for the market. Now, I'll just give you a simple example in FMCG. 5 years ago, 4 years ago, in Kerala, FMCG, my clients in FMCG, for example, we were selling 150-gram soap for 20 rupees a month. Okay. Now, what we realized in 2016 onwards was that we needed to start giving offers to the customers. So we started doing like buy 4, get 1 free. So buy 4, get 1 free, your costing has to be worked out. Then we went to buy 3, get 1 free, buy 2, get 1 free. And before COVID, we were actually looking at buy 1, get 1 free. That's the kind of status. And offers were running literally 365 days. You had to give offers continuously for customers to buy. Okay? So in fact, pre-COVID, we had a discussion. One of my clients is, buy 1, get 2 free. Yeah, buy 1, get 2 free. Is that the next normal? How do we do that profitably? So how do you do that profitably without compromising on your quality? It's by increasing productivity. Now, how do you do that? For example, I have my distribution wing. My average costing for my distribution, let's say, is costing me 12% to deliver, or 8 to 12%. Let's say 10% for simplicity's sake. My cost of distribution. So if my salesman is able to double his sales, okay, my cost of distribution would go down from 10 to maybe 7 or 6. Okay. And with that 4% extra, I could actually pass on to the market as part of this offer. I optimize my production efficiency. Okay, before we increase the production per shift with the same people. Okay, reduced wastage. So we got another 5-10%. We reduced our overheads. For example, in the past, in boom times, even incompetent salesman was profitable for us, because when in boom times, getting salespeople are a problem. So when we hire 10 people, we get 4 or 5 people who are not very competent. But we don't have the numbers. You call for 10 people interview, you'll probably get 11 people coming for the interview. So you need to hire all of them virtually. Whoever comes, you need to hire, since you're expanding. Now, what happens is that we have to have training people, training managers, training centers, supervision, assistant manager, route manager. We have to monitor them from head office, and we put a lot of effort in supporting our salespeople in terms of systems, procedures, and people to get them to sell more. So in a booming market, that's fine, because despite all those overheads, that additional sales given by that incompetent salesperson is profitable. But once you have understood that the market is going down, prices are going to go down, margins are going to go down, people are not willing to pay you for that overhead, we understand that we cannot tolerate incompetent salespeople. So we have cut that sector out. If I don't have incompetent salespeople, I don't need people training manager. I don't need heavy supervision. I don't need motivation things to motivate them. The only thing I need to do is give them the right product, service, and pricing, and pay them a good incentive and a salary so that they're motivated. And that gives us high employee productivity. So that's what we have been doing in many of my clients over the last 4 years, and we are already ready. Our productivity levels are way more than most of our competitors, and we are able to therefore match the market price profitably. So linked to that is low overhead. So if I'm doing a 10 crore sales with so much overhead, somebody else is doing 7 crore sales with the same overhead, because his productivity is low, which gives me flexibility in costing. Another thing is that I take appropriate decisions when I'm strong compared to when I'm weak. So I understand where the market is going very quickly, and I am ahead of the curve. Okay, I've seen our competitors follow us after 3 to 4 years. They're doing things now that we did 4 years ago, and in fact, in many cases, we have gone to the next step, and they're still trying to copy us previous what we did 4 years ago. So we are way ahead of the curve. Okay, so in weak businesses, decision making is slow, and most of the time, the decision finally taken is not appropriate. A very good thing which has helped us in this COVID-19 scenario is that as a strong business, we have a very good relationship with our suppliers. Because as I said, even essential services, supply was a big issue, raw material. Getting raw materials was a big issue in the initial phase of this lockdown. So our suppliers are, they're very curious about what we are doing, because all my clients have been growing in this recessionary period, and all suppliers are asking us, "What are you doing?" Because seeing most of their clients' sales going down, and they're seeing these, people who are following this right approach to business, sales have been going up, and payments are okay, and we are very aggressive, and we are asking them things that nobody else is asking. We want it like this. We want it this. We want bulk package. We start bulk packaging and all very early on. Buy four, get one buy, which many competitors didn't even start after. It took them a couple of years to start. Okay, so they know, they believe that we will survive. And so when during this COVID-19 crisis, we were able to reach out to them, and they supported us disproportionately compared to their other customers. If they had goods, limited goods, they gave most of it to people like us, rather than people weak businesses who they're afraid to give to. Because if they give it, they may not get the payment. If the company closes down, what happens, and so on. So this is what I mean by a strong business, not large or small. In fact, many strong businesses are actually small to medium, and there are very, very few big businesses which are really strong. You can just look at the data. How many strong big businesses have low debt? It is a fraction. Virtually everyone else is running on high debt. So it's most of the strong businesses are medium and small who have done the right things. So strong businesses will dominate over the next 1 year or 2 years. So now let me come to the time is flying. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Let's look at the sample, the last part, action plan for a restaurant, because it's an essential services business. So we were able to work during the lockdown. So I just give an example, a very, very simplified example of the key things, some of the key things that we did. There are a lot of other things we did. I don't have time to share, but I thought it'll give you a fair idea about what kind of action plan you could do in your business also. So let's look at the restaurant. It's based in a city in Kerala. Before the lockdown, we had 85% in-dining sales, 10% takeaway, and 5% home delivery or online home delivery. In fact, we were one of the major restaurants and bigger brand names to actually enroll with Swiggy and Zomato. In Kerala, we have an association, a Restaurants and Hotel Owners Association, which is very strong. And they have decided not to enroll on Swiggy or Zomato, and they've gone for local apps, which don't dominate like Swiggy or Zomato. The problem with those local apps is that they have very poor scale. So they're doing only a fraction of the deliveries that actually could happen. So I was instrumental in getting my client to break away from this hotel association rule and enroll on Swiggy and Zomato. And he had just started, and we had reached about 5% sale. It's a big decision to do it because upsetting the association is a risky thing. But I told him that is the future. We cannot get stuck. Either the association has to, that local app has to go up, which is not happening, or we have to do this as get additional sales. We did that, so we were already enrolled with Swiggy, Zomato, and so on. PBT, profit before tax, is approximately 10%. We're doing okay. We had zero loans, which is a great advantage, and we had a cash reserve. We have funds surplus which have been kept aside, which we have not diverted for other things. So that was the situation. What happened after lockdown? We immediately, the lockdown happened. We created a 3-phase plan. The first phase is to be implemented during the lockdown. Then we have a second phase, which is immediately after the lockdown, and we have a long-term phase. Okay, very briefly, I'll share these with you. So during the lockdown, what happened? Our restaurant closed at the start of the lockdown, as every restaurant closed in Kerala. Nobody was open for the first couple of days. And what we did is that we very quickly decided that we will restart because the moment it became clear that restaurants can open, online delivery can happen, home delivery can happen, we opened up. We restarted the kitchen operations approximately after 5 days of the lockdown, and no in dining was permitted, so that was closed. And we started working with a minimum kitchen staff strength. We expected that, maybe 20-30% of our total sales would come because we were doing 5% previously. So we just put enough staff for 10-20%, and we started off. We prepared a lockdown menu. We limited the variety so that the productivity of the staff would be much higher, the kitchen staff, and we didn't need too many people. And we looked at profitable items and attractive items like chicken roast. Beef would be expensive. The margins are low in beef right now. Whereas chicken, the prices actually dropped because of chicken flu. And so, people were still buying. So roast, for example, was the profitable thing. And we came in for, 1 kg roast, 5 kg roast, bulk deals to make it attractive for the customers, and which helped increase kitchen productivity. We marketed the lockdown menu through Facebook, Instagram in our area, about 9 kilometer radius, and promoting home delivery through Swiggy, Zomato, and OWN. Now that was a change in strategy. Till date, it's been very difficult to convince a restaurant owner to advertise for Swiggy and Zomato, because the concept is, they're taking 20% of my margin or whatever they negotiate with you. So they should give me the orders. So we discussed with my client, and I told him that, look, this is a golden opportunity. Okay, because online is the only thing, and Swiggy, Zomato are going to be the bulk online delivers at this particular point of time, for us. So we need to promote and get people to order through Swiggy, Zomato, and also own delivery. So we have a telephone ordering system, we can do own delivery. And that's what we actually did. We are continuously advertising very cheaply in our area to all the customers, because everyone's sitting at home, lockdown. So the market is very easy to tap at this particular stage. And that's what we've been doing. And luckily, because of this, we have actually increased our home delivery sales by 10 times from what it was previously. And right now, we are operating at 50% of our pre-COVID capacity, including in dining, which is quite significant. So our losses have reduced. We are running at a very slight loss at this point of time, at about 50% of our previous total volume, which is a great achievement for us. We have also promoted Easter and Vishu. We had two festivals during lockdown, and we had special menus for that. And those days we achieved 70% of our total pre-lockdown daily sales, which was very encouraging for us. So because demand went up, we went up to 50%, and in peak time 70%, we have had to increase the working staff to cope with the increased demand. We called back more people for kitchen and for some delivery, because we have started doing own delivery also. We've got a significant amount of people who are calling us for orders who are not on Swiggy or Zomato. As everyone probably did, we also paid salaries for the March salaries to our entire staff because of the crisis. And we told the in-dining staff and non-working kitchen staff to take paid leave during their holiday. We paid them the salaries, told them to sit at home. We have managed, so obviously we ran at a cash deficit. We managed it from our reserves. And we also managed to negotiate with our landlord for zero rent during lockdown. So, so our actual losses are not much, because once we remove the rent, we're not paying rent for this month. I think we have a very insignificant loss at this point, mostly because we are paying full salaries for the entire staff, even those who are not working for the last month. So what is our plan post-lockdown? So in fact, we are planning to implement now. Ramzan has happened, so we're actually planning to, we've started implementing this partly, but as a theory, I'm just saying post-lockdown. We have decided that takeaway, because we're starting to see people coming for takeaway in a small way. People can move out in Kerala, even in red zones for essentials. So we are seeing people come to our restaurant and buy takeaway. Okay. And we are now planning to promote that, again using digital media. And we are looking at value for money offerings with additional discounts, because we don't have aggregated costs on that. And we hope to achieve 100% of our previous sales, okay, because of takeaway. I'm at the end, don't worry. So one more slide or two more slides. So the next thing we are planning in the short term is minimize expenses in in-dining, because we believe volumes will be low due to social distancing norms. We won't be able to have the full number of people sitting in the restaurant. There'll be partitions, there'll be limitations. So our output in in-dining is going to drop. It's going to be unprofitable. So we'll have to reduce fixed salaries for in-dining staff and increase incentives and using contactless dining. And we are very clear that even if in-dining is not there, we'll have to survive. If in-dining is profitable, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't do it. That's the kind of thought process we have now. We will remove excess manpower after lockdown. We will focus only on productive employees, and we will negotiate rent with the lockdown, so after the lockdown, so that we have a significantly lower rent post lockdown. A very interesting thing that we're looking at is online delivery. We have done a good job, but it's only happening in 5 kilometers radius, because Swiggy, Zomato, even online, they have a minimum requirement. They will not deliver beyond that. So we have seen other pockets beyond 5 kilometers where people are asking for our product, but delivery is not happening. So after lockdown, long term, after takeaway succeeds and we reach 100% of our sales, we intend to start a hybrid cloud kitchen in a pocket which is away from us 5 kilometers, where we will give items from the central kitchen. The final thing will be done there, and we will promote takeaway and home delivery only at that particular 5 kilometer radius. And we believe a lot of restaurants are closed or closing down, and we can take over the area at a low rent and most of the equipment at a throwaway price. So with that, we believe that we will achieve 125% of our total lockdown sales, pre-lockdown sales. Another thing that we're discussing is that we have started now looking at ready to fry goods, like samosas. So you can order from us, we'll make it in our central kitchen, and you home delivery or takeaway, and you can keep it at home and fry as and when you require. Okay, so that's another idea, and we have many other ideas, but I thought I'll limit it to this. So this is the phase 3 part of the plan. So I think with that, I've wound up my presentation. Thank you. I think I've overshot my time budget, and if you have any questions, I'll be willing to take them. Jubran.
Thank you so much, sir, for extremely valuable insight which you have given on the industry as well as how to cope with it. And by the grace of Almighty, a lot of people have shown significant interest and they have been extremely motivated. We're getting a lot of positive responses as well. So just one or two questions we have currently, since we are short of time. One would be, will the current market scenario impact the real estate industry, namely low resident rentals, poor apartment sales? When do you think it will get back to normal?
See, I believe virtually every sector of the economy, every market will shrink. Okay, so real estate is not an exception. There are very few markets which will expand, like digital marketing kind of companies, online delivery, website, e-commerce. So we're still identifying sectors which will actually grow, but they're in a minority. Every other sector will shrink. You have to be very clear about that, and you have to plan for shrinking. So if you think that, I've heard people talk about a lot of NRIs are coming back, we're going to suddenly see a spurt in flat sales, and the theories like that are going around, which may be true. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but that's not a long-term thing. If it's going to happen, it'll happen in for a few months or so, and then afterwards it'll peter down, and you'll have the real scenario. So which means in real estate, it will go down. The market will go down. So you need to aggressively pricing is going to be an issue. If I'm buying a flat at this particular point of time, definitely I'm going to negotiate. If I have the money to buy, I will negotiate. So pricing is going to be an issue. So costing has to be looked at, pricing has to be looked at, and marketing has to be looked at. I'll just give you an example of one of my people who's a builder. He was doing digital marketing and creating about 100 leads per month at a particular cost, and he was happy with that. So post lockdown, he came to me and he asked me. He's not a client of mine; he's a friend. He told me, well, how do I get? I said, you have to increase your sales. There's no other way, because the market is shrinking. If you're a strong player, he's a reasonably strong player. He's got very low loans. He's got limited market share. So as I said, strong players can dominate. So I told him, you can actually increase your sales if you're strong enough. So he said, but why? My digital marketing company has said we should stop advertising in lockdown because nobody, you can't do site visits and all that. So I told him that's absolutely the wrong idea. A lockdown is where you can actually generate interest, and site visits can happen after lockdown. So what we did is we talked to another digital marketing company and gave them a project which was not given to the previous company, and we encouraged them to market aggressively. And in the last 2 weeks, we have generated more than 350 leads, and out of that, 32 site visits have come from that. And hopefully on 3rd May or 4th May, we will start with the site visits. And in fact, the cost of the leads has dropped dramatically. So we've understood that the previous digital company was actually charging us high overhead for generating those leads. And of course, even the lockdown is an advantage, the cost of marketing them. So if you're a strong player, you can actually sell more, in my opinion. But it's like this: if you're a strong player, if you're a player in the market is not going to zero. Okay? Maybe it'll drop by 10, 20, 30%. Now, what happens is the customer comes to you. They want, all the parameters, and one parameter they want is pricing. So, they'll ask, okay, can you give it at this price? If you give it at this price, sales will go up. If you give it a higher price, sales will go down. So the thing is, either you have two options: either you don't give it at that price, which means you don't sell, or you give it at that price, which then, if you're a strong player with low cost, high productivity, it is still profitable. You can still make some profits. If you're a weak player, you give it at that price and you lose money. So again, as I said, I don't think there's anything much a weak player can do in this market. So that's why I've focused my thinking on strong players, because weak players, it's most of my clients, virtually all of them are strong. So I have not really got into weak player scenario. But from what I can see, it is virtually impossible for a weak player to get out of this scenario properly. If you're strong, if you aggressively market and give the right pricing, you can still capture market share and survive. That's my answer to that question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tini. Currently, we have two more questions, but however, I would send them to you through mail and you can answer them. It's just two basic questions. So since we're running short of time, it's already 12:30. So I would like to firstly thank you for your valuable insight in terms of the topic, in terms of how to handle the situation and what entrepreneurs should look forward to. It's been really an exciting session, and a lot of participants have enjoyed it. We have been getting a lot of positive feedbacks as well. So we like to thank you once again for being a part of the session and to speak on behalf of the IKLAS Academy. Thank you so much, sir. Looking forward to be in touch with you.
Thank you.